The world is hurting right now, and it's time to rise up. As we lift ourselves up in body, mind, and spirit, we can reach out to others and be a light in a sea of darkness. Welcome to the Movement for Global Health with your host, Dr. Mary Zennett.
Award-winning author, public speaker, and nationally syndicated radio show and podcast host, CEO of Executive Medicine of Texas, BS in Health Sciences and Clinical Research from George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences, MS in Professional Studies from George Washington University, and a graduate certificate in strategic management from Harvard Extension School. It is our absolute privilege today to welcome Judy Gaman. Judy, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to visit with you.
You know, on our show, we talk a lot about lifestyle tips, and then it struck me how focused you are, and you've got really good tips. And I thought today we could talk about ways we can get our health back after COVID. You know, as well as I, COVID decimated the globe in every area of our lives. So how do we pick up the pieces? What are some tips you can give us to get our health back after COVID?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that question, because it is something that at Executive Medicine of Texas, we get asked quite a bit. Our patients come in and they say, I just don't feel quite right. I don't have my energy back, or they're having trouble getting in the groove. Maybe their relationships took a hit, whether that's with their spouse or their kids, or just some professional relationships because they weren't going to their usual association meetings and places where they really had this social outlet. And I think that's the first place we tell them to work on, because there's so much research that shows us that having relationships and actually socializing with others, speaking to people, not on Zoom, not on the phone, but really being in someone else's space and them being in your space actually changes our body chemistry. It changes the brain. The brain fires completely differently when we're visiting with someone and we're having a real conversation in person than when we're just doing it over a computer or a phone. So that's the first thing. We say, even if you don't feel like going, get yourself out there, because you've just got to get back in the habit of being social. And I would say 99% of the time, people come back and say, wow, I had no idea how much I missed my friends at Kiwanis or at Rotary or, at this executive group or the chamber or wherever they decided to go. They suddenly are like, wow, I didn't even know what I didn't know that I was missing. Wow. And the same thing goes for family. Get back into those date nights, find things to do with your family, get outside. We've kind of become a little bit of homebodies, a little too comfortable with television. And even when it comes to television, we tell people to take a news diet, because there's so much stress with watching the news. back in the day, and I know I'm giving away my age, and forgive me if I give away yours when I say we remember when news came on at 5 and 6 o'clock. That's when the
right.
news came on. And now it's just 24/7 and everything's breaking news. And even the sounds that you hear and the music that they play for the news, it's like high alert. So we really get ourselves worked up into this high alert state.
Exactly.
And if we can move away from some of those things, I mean, those are, just an aspect of it. And that's covering kind of the mental aspect. There's several other things that people can do from a physical standpoint as well.
Wow, those are so important. We talk a lot about the kids, helping the parents get them away from that social media too, because we see them, they're up all night.
Mm-hmm.
And none of it's positive, and it's just anxiety provoking, producing, and it's just not healthy.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
healthy.
Absolutely. And the blue light that come off
Oh,
the phones, and then their body doesn't produce melatonin, so they don't sleep. But there's a lot of like adrenaline rush that happens on social media. And a lot of that is also on purpose. It's so that those social media platforms can keep you engaged and keep you there. And again, it's the sights and the sounds and the scrolling. And as you're looking through things, there's pop-ups and I call this the pop-up generation because their whole life has been a giant interruption, whether it is the spam calls on the phone or the pop-ups on the computer or, whatever it is, they have lived with this their whole lives, this younger generation. So it's little wonder that they have trouble focusing or that they have this desire or need to go, 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 go. They just haven't learned the beauty of being still because it's not something that they've really experienced.
yes. Thank you so much for bringing, that's really critical coming after COVID. And like you said, not isolating anymore. The isolation was brutal. It was
It
absolutely
certainly
brutal.
was. There's something that kind of went on, and we don't really hear about this too much, but it's a known factor in that space, and that is the independent living center. So this is where people go that they don't really need a nursing home, they don't really need assisted
Right.
living, but in their own home, maybe they're not eating right because they eat alone or what have you. So it's kind of like a step down from living on your own, but you don't quite need that help. What they found is that isolation that took place during the lockdowns and the shutdowns and all the different regulations that came out. There were a lot of people that were behind doors and they weren't going out and going to the dining room, and the meals were being brought to their rooms, and people with masks on, so they weren't even seeing a smiling face, which we know that a smiling face actually has a chemical reaction in the brain when we see it. It's why we smile back. It's kind of a reflex. So this is going on during the whole pandemic where people were just kind of behind closed doors. They became even more shut in than you would imagine. And there's so much research even before the pandemic about what happens with shut-ins. So there was almost a mass exodus from the independent living centers into assisted living because they had lost the ability to function on that higher level as seniors. So they saw people moving out very quickly. We saw a lot of deaths in that population, which was usually not quite as high as, say, assisted living or even in sure there were things that were happening in nursing homes too, but there still was that one-on-one because there had to be one-on-one. People were touching them and turning them and those kinds of things, but that wasn't happening in the independent living centers and even for people who were shut-ins at home.
And I've talked about this. It's like a collective sense of grief. We've lost so much during those 2 years. And we need to acknowledge it, like in our own families, our neighbors, our communities. But then we've got to pick ourselves up. We have to pick ourselves up and say, no, we're not going to live like this.
Yeah, and that is really, I think, the key for all of us. and is to not live in fear and to recognize when fear is being thrust upon us for monetary gain. And we see a lot of that. The news companies made tremendous amount of money on the ads that they sold when people were held captive by their television. And we have to just recognize that that is their business, is to make money. And how do they make money is to get your attention and keep your attention so that they can sell the ads and such while they have your attention. Just to recognize that. It doesn't mean that they're all evil. There's definitely a place for news outlets, but to recognize that and to set yourself up with, okay, I will watch the news from this time to this time, but not be so beholden to everything. And now we've got the apps. And I found myself, just as guilty of checking the app in the middle of the day to say, oh, did anything happen? Because we're almost in this state of high alert. What happened? What's the next thing? We're kind of afraid the next ball is going to drop. A lot of us saw many people pass away in the last couple of years. And that brings on a whole other grief. And it's very complicated grief because it wasn't like this person was sick for a long time and, they're in a better place and all of that we tell ourselves when somebody passes. A lot of times we saw these people on Friday and the next Friday they weren't there, and we're trying to reconcile that. Or maybe they were really young and they passed away. And then just people that passed away for other reasons. We didn't have those connections because we were separated for a while. So then we felt this loss of time that we didn't get with them. And all of this, like you said, we just have to recognize it and then say, okay, this happened. This is real. I can feel the feels, cry the cries, and not just push it down, pretend it didn't happen. I mean, it happened. And one thing that I think the entire medical community would like to see out of what happened with the pandemic is a real, true discussion. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could we do better?
Yes.
And if we could have that discussion, we'd be so much further ahead. And I also think it would help in the finger pointing on both sides, because if it was a real discussion, we'd be saying things like, well, maybe we shouldn't have jumped the gun on vents. Maybe we should have looked at the research on vitamin D in the ICU. I mean, there was so much coming out. And depending on which hospital you went, you were treated one way, and what part of the country you were in, you were treated another way. What can we learn from that? And then what can we learn from some of the mandates? Was the end all be all thing to do is get behind closed doors and mask up, and what are the other things that happen because of that? And maybe it should have been a shorter period of time. Maybe we should have made it age specific. Just going back and really having an honest conversation about what did we do right? What did we do wrong? If we ever get in this position again, how do we get, first of all, everyone on the same page? Because we all know that didn't happen. And then what did we learn that we can apply? And the only way we're going to grow as a society is to have an honest conversation about what can we learn from this.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. That's so important. And because what we see is conversations that are, they're backed by profits, but there's no willingness to discuss in a critical thinking manner. And it gets intimidating.
It does.
So people said, wait a minute. I have thoughts and feelings about it, but I don't want to be attacked. I don't want my social media shut down. I mean, it's honest. So then where do you go with those thoughts and feelings? Where do you go? Now, I'm hoping like you got, I'm a huge proponent. I don't know if you know, I've been a psychiatrist for 35 years, and I have an MBA in health administration. So I'm big on public health. And I totally believe in the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship.
100%.
And those walls are sacred. that is confidential information. And my hope and prayer is, and I know in your clinic it's that way, that people can quietly express, wow, I don't know what happened, but what about this? And what about this? And that your doctors, your providers provide a sounding board, a safe space for them to share some of their innermost feelings.
Yeah. It is so true. And in primary care, which is our space, a lot of times in a lot of practices, I call it the HMO treadmill. We're not HMO, we're concierge, and we're preventative based, and and really that allows that relationship to happen and to prosper, because we're not put on time constraints. We're not beholden to the HMO. We're not beholden to particular regulations that are out there for profit purposes. It's really about that relationship. And I think because our physicians come from such a place that they know the importance of that. One of our physicians practiced in Canada under socialized medicine, and years ago was the head of family medicine for all of Manitoba, and was going through the contracts for what the government was going to pay for and not pay for, and we got to fix the potholes, and so they have like this really unique background. Another one of our physicians also has a master's in public health, which is a really neat combination, as because then you see the bigger picture as well. And then another one has 4 different board certifications. So it's really interesting to see how their relationships with their patients evolved during the pandemic and during this time, because when other doctors were closing the doors, or you got an answering machine or whatever, we were calling our patients. Hey, how are you feeling? Are you scared? What are you doing with your family? How are your parents? They may not even be our patients, but a lot of people, the stress was, I have aging parents. What am I going to do if my parents die? There was a lot of stress that was on the particular age that we see, which is mostly like 40s, 50s, 60s, but really 40s, 50s is a sweet spot for us. So they're running businesses or owning businesses. They've got aging parents. They've got kids at home, or maybe off at college, which was a whole nother stress. And it was like this giant, like pressure cooker of, my whole life is imploding. And I know from what you do, that you completely understand the toll that takes, not just mentally, but physically on their bodies. We saw their immune system have issues because they were so stressed. We saw those relationships struggle because they were so stressed, and nobody had the answers. It wasn't like you could just Google the answer, or, call up your friend and your friend can counsel you out of this, or call your psychiatrist. And I mean, it was really a whole world struggle, and we hadn't ever seen that.
Exactly. Can you talk a little bit more about stress and the impact on our health?
Yeah, stress is so important. And when we look at, why do we have stress? Why do we have the fight or flight? Because in some instances, we need that. We need to be able to react quickly. And especially, when we were back in the hunters and gatherers, but even today, we're driving a car, somebody pulls out, you have to be able to have quick reflexes. And stress in some levels, in short stints, is good. It's part of our system. We're built for it. But it's this chronic stress that we get into. And it's not, I don't want to just put all this on the pandemic. You could have chronic stress because you're in a job that is just killing you, or you're traveling too much, or someone in your family is dying, or maybe you have a chronic disease. So there's a lot of things that can go into why we have stress. And then if you take that, now I have stress and I don't have a relief from the stress, we get chronic inflammation. And we now know through many, many trials, clinical trials, that chronic inflammation is actually the root cause of so many chronic diseases, diabetes and heart disease and cancer. And it comes from this constant state of inflammation. And figuring out how do we turn this down, tone this down. Counseling is huge. We're a big proponent of seeing your counselor, talk to your family physician. You have family counseling the art of talking to one another is something that we've somehow gotten away from. And it's so good to talk things out. And maybe it's because of society right now where we're in you can agree with me or you can be wrong. And that doesn't really work. It doesn't help the stress levels whatsoever. But if we can talk this out, journaling, we have so many of our patients, we tell them, keep a journal by your bed. If you're religious, read your scriptures. Or if you're not religious, fine, read a book. Just the art of having a bedtime routine is a great way to be able to go to sleep and to actually take that dial of stress and just dial it down a little bit. Journaling is great. Prayer journals are great. We've just seen tremendous success with these kind of tools. And then walking and being present, it seems so simple to just go for a walk, but don't put your headphones on. Don't take your phone with you and actually go for a walk. Breathe in, breathe out, watch the birds, whatever, observe things around you. And it's amazing how the body has the ability to kind of self-meditate with a simple thing like going for a walk.
Oh, it's so true, Judy. You just unpacked so much, so many invaluable tips for us. And I hope our listeners will go back and listen to this again. And because to have it soak in, to listen, go for a walk and listen. And you hear the birds and look at the beauty around you. Take it in and breathe with all your senses. And we don't do that. I think it's in our, like you say, our fast pace, our media world, our devices. And believe me, I'm on them as much as anybody, so I'm not criticizing, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And we need to nourish our being, our senses with all the modalities that are really, they're indispensable.
For sure. Now, have you noticed that, and you brought up all the senses, have you noticed that people are so in tune with their eyes? They're scrolling through their phone.
Yes.
They're attached to the television. Their eyes are predominantly the sense they're using. Have you noticed that because of that, they've lost abilities to listen really well? Some of their communication, they fail to just reach out and touch, family members. Hugs go a long way. It reminds me back, and I know you know this story, but maybe for your listeners or viewers, about the Romanian orphanage and the failure to thrive. And just to recap for your audience, they had an orphanage in Romania, and these babies were not growing. They weren't thriving, and they were feeding them, and they prop them up and they give them a bottle. They were feeding them, they were changing them, and then they realized the power of touch and the power of touch as it relates to growth. And they went in and they started holding the babies, rocking them in rocking chairs, human touch. And suddenly these babies just started blossoming. They gained weight, they got taller, they grew hair. And that's such a good example for all of us as we, think about raising our children or having a nurturing relationship with our spouse, or even in this time in society where we're all like, don't touch, it's such and it's not just pandemic stuff. It's all this weird stuff. I will walk up to an employee and just give him a pat on the back, give him a hug. And, I think we've gotten so far the other side that we can't touch our employees. We can't compliment them for fear of complimenting them the wrong way, or
Mhm.
I don't know. I've never found that, giving them a pat on the back or giving them a hug has ever hurt anything. If anything, it's just made them smile. And what does
Yes.
that do? We know it's a reflex, made me smile. So, this positive reinforcement in the workforce, at home, with your spouse. When's the last time you held hands? Hold hands. Don't sit on opposite sides of the couch if you're watching a movie. Snuggle up together. This seems so weird because we all did it when we're dating, but what happens when we get married? We tend to well, I'll lean on this armrest and you lean on that armrest and we'll eat our ice cream and watch The Biggest Loser. That's kind of the rut we tend to get into. And we have to kind of unpack that a little bit and be mindful. And then one tip for your listeners on the phone is self-regulate. There actually is on every phone a way you can track your daily and weekly screen time. And if you actually look, you're going to be shocked. But it's so important. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I first did that. I was like, there is no way I was on my phone for 13 hours this week. Impossible. Wow. And it was true. And so the next week I tried to be a little more mindful. So I got the little notification, your phone use or your screen time is down. I'm like, great. And it's like, you are now 12 hours and 10 minutes. I'm like, what? How is this happening? So, just even like for myself, I thought there's no way. But then when I started thinking about, okay, well, divide that by 7. Yeah, I probably am on my phone that long. And then if you multiply it the other direction and say, wow, if that was that much time in a week times 52, how much of my life am I wasting on this device?
Yes. It's amazing. And like you say, I mean, you're very knowledgeable, but you're like, I was on the phone that much?
I was shocked. You
just can't even believe it.
Yeah. And it goes to that distracted mindset. We're all in a distracted mindset.
Exactly.
We run to the next shiny object.
It's just the way we're programmed. It's the way our environment is right now. But as you say, the awareness, it's like, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
I can shut the phone off. I can, they can leave me a message and just have certain times of the day when you're answering messages.
Yep. I actually left someone a message and their voicemail said, I return calls at 8, 12, and 4. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
I mean, we tend to think that might offend somebody, but I appreciated that. I'm like, okay, I left this at 1. I'll talk to them after 4 o'clock.
Isn't it
and I
true?
could mentally put it away. And I wasn't upset that they weren't there 24/7. It's setting those boundaries.
Exactly. That's such a critical word, boundaries. And, I was going to ask you, you talk a lot about longevity. You've talked about people that live over 100. What are some lessons that they teach us about leadership, about longevity? I have a feeling there's real secrets there that we can learn from.
There certainly are. And Dr. Zennett, the craziest thing is I was working on a book with to the physicians at our practice. It's called Age to Perfection, How to Thrive to 100, Happy, Healthy, and Wise. When I first started working on this book, I actually was just, doing the research, what's happening in these blue zones, and really kind of absorbing other people's data. And then I had this, I guess, epiphany. Why don't I just ask people over 100, how did they do it? So I had this writing assistant, and a fabulous young lady. And I asked Emily to find me people over 100. I said, here's the criteria, they got to be able to have a conversation. They can't be drooling all over themselves. They have to have enough memory that that this is going to be a viable interview. And I was shocked, actually. And everything I thought about people over 100 was much different than what I found out.
Wow.
There were a few things that are across the board the same that we got in the interviews. And it was, have friends, be social, exercise. All these people exercise, and what that looked for them was a little bit different for each of them. One of them still went to the gym every day, but she just doesn't do the weights. She does the machines without the weights. She was so cute. She said, "I've got to keep my machine oil. And the only way I can keep my own machine oiled is just keep it moving." And she just, she was so cute. And they all had things, and they all believed in a higher power. They were not the same religion. They were not the same faith, but they all had believed in a higher power. I thought all of these things were really fascinating, that they really, had done these things without somebody writing a book to tell them to do them. Excuse me. They just really knew that this was the right way to live.
They knew in their knowing exactly. Wow.
And
again, it can seem so simple and basic.
Oh, it is simple and basic. Well, after I interviewed them, I had this really crazy, wild-haired idea to go into the school and ask these elementary students, what does it take to live to be 100? And you know what? They said the same thing that those people told me. We got to have a lot of friends. You got, everything I was hearing from these people over 100, these young children they knew innately what it was going to take to live a long and happy life. And somewhere between 15 and 90, the world takes hold of us, and we forget what it takes. Maybe it's all the marketing messages, or we get busy, that 4-letter word, busy, but we somehow forget what we knew as children. And we do know, we're born with knowing how to live long and live happy and live healthy.
Beautiful. And out of the mouths of babes. It really is.
It was so
honored that.
It was so cute. It was just so cute. So I included them in the book because I thought, this is valuable information.
It is valuable information. And before we close, I want to ask you a little bit about brain health, because I'm hearing data. Okay, it's really scary. It is. I'm not here to catastrophize. That's not going to be helpful. But younger and younger people having issues with brain health. So what can we do? What can we empower people with some pearls to really get their brains back on track and keep in tip-top shape?
Well, the number one thing that is such an easy fix, and all of your listeners can do right now, is stop consuming artificial sweeteners. We now know that there is a huge connection between the brain and the gut. We know that the gut microbiome is highly disrupted by artificial sweeteners, and they can be in your toothpaste, they can be in your sodas, they can be all over the place. Even some medications, believe it or not, some children's medications have them in them. And this is so critical. Just this one change has changed so many people's lives. They get off of these diet sodas, they get off of these, all the different things they're doing. Gum, a lot of gum has artificial sweeteners. Their headaches go away. Yes. Their brain works better. They're less moody. We see this giant connection between the gut microbiome and bipolar disorder. So saying just stop them. Don't add them to your coffee. Don't do it. Make that number one. And then exercise. The brain really responds so positively to physical exercise. So do it. And if you don't think you can do it, you're just wrong. Just baby steps. Don't go say, I'm going to exercise. I'm going to sign up for the 5K. No, it doesn't work like that. So, do something. Go for that walk around the block. Say, I'm going to do one push-up today. Just start somewhere. I remember when I set a goal and I was like, I'm going to take 10,000 steps a day. And I just felt like that was so hard. And now I take 10,000 steps before 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, golly, because I knew my day would get away from me. People were like, how do you do that 10,000 steps before 10 o'clock? I walk for an hour. Anybody can do this. Like, oh, I don't know. I got a full-time job. So do I. I just get up earlier. and it really was, it isn't like I'm bragging, because trust me, it took me 50 years to be able to say, I'm going to get up an hour early and go walk 10,000 steps in the morning. Exactly. I get it. It's not going to be something that that is going to come natural. But if you just take these steps, like to do something, do
Yes.
something physical,
Yes.
get on the ground and play with your kids.
Yes.
We were doing, this is kind of funny, kind of embarrassing too, but I'll tell you this quick little story. We were doing this new physical functional medicine test that we're going to start using on our patients at Executive Medicine. So I took the test, and I didn't know that I was like really like kind of lopsided. I'm like, oh man, when I tried this one thing, I just fall over to one side. So this is the point of the test, right? But I am like, I always want to achieve and overachieve. And I'm like, I got to do it again. They're like, no matter how many times you do it, you're probably not you're just going to fall over. So I stand up and I'm like, I can still do a cartwheel. Oh my gosh, Dr. Zennett, I have not done a cartwheel in, I don't know, 2 decades, but I was so doggone like, I can still do a cartwheel. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, do one. I did, and thank God I didn't break my neck. And the next day I woke up and I was like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that cartwheel. So I get it when people are listening. I'm not, when I say I walk, 10,000 steps toward 10 a.m., I'm no hero. I'm not out there running marathons or anything like that. I just decided that my mom had Alzheimer's. My mom passed away this year. And I said, I'm going to do the things I can do. I can't control the things I can't control. And I do know I have the genetic factors because I had my 23andMe done. And that was one of the things on there I had done years ago. And so I know that, and I could either bury my head in the sand and say, oh, this is the way life's going to be. And this is what happened to mom. And, and I start getting paranoid. I could go down that road so easily, but instead I say, what can I do to not flip that switch on?
Exactly.
And really focus on that. So take whatever energy your listeners have, whatever that is, whatever that fear is, whatever that negative thing that's just nagging at you, really got you down, and turn it around and find a way to make it positive. Because if you can turn it into positive energy, wow, and make a life change because that's what drives you, it's life changing. I mean, I could live in fear. I could say, oh my gosh, I'm terrified, but I just choose not to.
Exactly. Turn it around. That's very inspiring, Judy. Well, Judy, it's been an absolute privilege to have you here today. And I mean, you are a wealth of really important knowledge and lifestyle tips and information. How can our listeners reach out to you and learn more about you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. They can go to Judy Gaman, so JudyGaman.com. And if they want to learn about the practice, Executive Medicine of Texas, they can go to EM and then Texas spelled out.com. Beautiful.
And we will include those links in the show notes. Any final words for our listeners before we close?
Just love your neighbors, your friends, your family, and you can wake up every day. I love this old quote. I wish I knew who said it first, but it's such a good quote. You can wake up and say, good Lord, it's morning, or you can wake up and say, good morning, Lord. And I just always have remembered that and thought, when we wake up, we choose the beat of that day. And so when you wake up tomorrow, wake up and choose the beat of your day. And I think it'll just make your day so much better.
That is so awesome. Judy Gaman, again, it's a privilege. And I know our listeners are going to be listening to this over and over to soak up all the pearls that you've given us in this time. And thank you for all the work you do. You do so much.
Thank you. I mean, it's a pleasure. It's interesting when somebody like of your stature gives a compliment, because I just feel so humbled that you have an appreciation for the interview, and we had this wonderful conversation, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. So thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's terrific.
It's like we said, together, right? As in reaching to our family, friends, neighbors. I say this all the time. we can create a healthy world. That it's one person at a time, one heart at a time, one brain at a time, one prayer at a time, and rinse and repeat over and over and over.
Such a great comment and such a great visual. So terrific. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you again, Judy.